Anonymous message. The plain and simple truth. Greetings, sisters and brothers. People of the world. We, Anonymous, are back with this message. It is a most disturbing development of humanitarian crises throughout the world. Anonymous activists and hackers are working around the clock these days in order to try to adjust the situation. But this time we need your help. People from all over the world, please try to open your eyes. Please try to understand what is about to happen.
People are talking a lot about inequality these days. About the fact that the richest 1% have so much more than everybody else. But most of the focus seems to be on the United States. And it strikes me that the same story needs to be told about global inequality too. So I did some research, and this is what I found from reliable sources like the UN. It turns out that while the US is totally out of whack, things are actually way worse for the planet as a whole. Let's start with this graph. A perfectly even distribution of wealth among all living people, with everyone divided into 5 equal groups. Now, let's show how much each group actually has. Shocking, right? 80% of the world's people barely have any wealth. It's hard to even see them on the chart. Meanwhile, the richest 2%, they have more wealth than half of the rest of the world. Let's look at this chart another way. Let's take the whole world's population, all 7 billion of us, and reduce it to just a representative 100 individuals. Here they are, poorest people on the left, richest people on the right. Now let's show how the world's total wealth, roughly $223 trillion, is distributed. The vast majority have practically nothing. Nothing with which to educate their children, nothing with which to pay for basic medicines. While the richest 1%, they've accumulated 43% of our world's wealth. The bottom 80%, meanwhile, that's 8 out of every 10 people, have just 6% between them. But even this doesn't really show how extreme things have become. The richest 300 people on Earth have the same wealth as the poorest 3 billion. So the number of people it takes to fill a mid-sized commercial aircraft have more wealth than the populations of India, China, the US, and Brazil combined. We can also see this difference geographically, with a huge and growing gap between a few rich places versus the majority of the world. For most of history, things were much more equal. 200 years ago, rich countries were only 3 times richer than poor countries. By the end of colonialism in the 1960s, they were 35 times richer. Today, they're about 80 times richer. Rich countries try to compensate for this by giving aid to poor countries, about $130 billion each year. That's a lot of money. So then why does the wealth gap keep getting bigger? One reason I found is that large corporations are taking more than $900 billion out of poor countries each year through a form of tax avoidance called trade mispricing. On top of this, each year poor countries are paying about $600 billion in debt service to rich countries on loans that have already been paid off many times over. And then there's the money that poor countries lose from trade rules imposed by rich countries to get access to more resources and cheaper labor. Economists from the University of Massachusetts calculate that this costs poor countries about $500 billion a year. Altogether, that's more than $2 trillion that flows from some of the poorest parts of the world to the richest. Every year. Rich governments like to say they're helping poor countries develop. But who's developing who here? This makes me think that there's something wrong with the basic rules of the global economy. It can't be okay that the wealth of our planet is becoming so concentrated in the hands of such a tiny number of people. The only reasonable response, it seems to me, and our only hope, is to change the rules.
In generations, the world has gone through war, disasters, and diseases, but we have always got back on the feet. Now a far more dangerous situation unfolds. We see people in France protest against their government, and right they have, and we all have. But what does the little stupid Macron say? He tells everybody this is bullies, destroying peace and order. Well, that is so wrong. Why do they protest? Because, like the rest of the world, they are getting poorer. Soon, there will be no options left. So what then? Well, most likely wars, civil wars, diseases, and disasters. We, Anonymous, want you all to pay attention to what we now are telling you, and to understand. Your lives are in your own hands. Your fellow human being is your family. It simply means take care of one another, and do like the French people. Stand up when something is wrong. Do not sit in your houses on Christmas evening, having a wonderful time, when someone next door is alone, maybe without food. This year's Christmas you all are going to think, and think very carefully, what you can do to make someone's life a little better. We, Anonymous, hope that you all are starting to wake up now. At least we want to believe that it is actually you that can make a difference in the world. Yes, you. And remember, if you do not take action now, you will soon find out how bad it is going to be when you all are too late. Protest against internet censorship before it is too late. Protest against your right to free speech. Protest against rules that stop you all from demonstration. And protest against your prime minister, president, or some other clown that you elected for a job he or she obviously not can handle. Then it is your job to sack that schmuck and put someone else in that job.
One night in England, 3,500 people are living rough on the street. Last year, 275,000 people approached their local authority for homeless assistance. That can't be right. That's fucking mental. That is 250,000 people who are that close to living rough on the streets, and 3,500 people who are actually living rough on the street. 124,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Fucking children. These stats are horrendous. Oh, here we go. I wonder what. Over half of homeless services have seen their funding cut in the last 5 years. 3,500 people. It's a societal failure, homelessness. It's one of the biggest indications that a society has failed is people who are hungry, begging and sleeping on the streets. And yet we're encouraged to see homeless people as if they've somehow failed themselves. It's their fault. They haven't worked hard enough. Don't worry about it. It's not your fault. Look at him. He's pissed. It must be his fault. It must be his fault, because we live in a meritocracy where if you work hard enough, you will succeed, which of course is plainly bollocks. It's exactly the same way that we treat people on benefits. And then we kid ourselves that not only is it their fault, but somehow that they're dangerous. Even the language that we use, beggars operate in this, operate like they're the fucking White Lightning Mafia or something. The other one, don't encourage begging. What, by giving him 20p? I'm not encouraging it, but the guy wants a cup of tea or a ruck of fucking crack or something. All right? Don't encourage it. It's like don't feed the pigeons. Vermin. Yeah, they're an embarrassment. I don't know. Maybe it is encouraging it. Maybe there is a better way to help. Fuck this. Just wait there 2 secs. And yes, some of them stink of piss. Do you know why they stink of piss? Because he pissed himself last Tuesday, and a hot shower and a change of clothes has yet to present itself. Okay, yeah, but I walk past him every day. He is literally and proverbially a bad smell. That madman's shouting at the pigeons again. Let's just take a look at that sentence, shall we? A grown man who is addicted to alcohol, who is mentally ill without a roof over his head, is shouting at the pigeons again. And yet I walk past him. Yet I live in a society where everyone walks past him. I live in a society where the government does nothing about it apart from cut funding. Why is a policeman or an ambulance not stopping and taking him somewhere safe and warm? A society doesn't work if one person is living rough on the street. It's morally bankrupt if this is normal and on the increase and getting worse. And if it's getting worse, it's more visible. And if it's more visible, I have to do more to try and ignore it to be able to get on with my day, which means I become part of the problem. Every day I walk past people who are cold and hungry and ill and homeless, and I don't stop and give them everything I have. Shame on me. Sleeping rough has doubled since 2010. Doubled! I mean, if you've seen it, I've noticed it. Have you know? I've noticed it's doubled. Hang on a minute. Did I not just say that homelessness services have been halved, and yet homelessness has doubled? The funding's halved and the problem's doubled. It's almost like those two statistics are related somehow, isn't it? It doesn't matter what your politics are. One person living rough on the street, your government's failed. Cheese sandwich, a packet of tobacco, some water, and a little bottle of whiskey.
We are anonymous. We care about you all. We do not forgive, and we do not forget. To all governments around the world, expect us